Welcome, everyone. We'll give folks just a moment to enter the space and then we'll get started. Okay, as everyone continues to stream in, I'd like to welcome you to PNP Live. My name is Chelsea Lake. I'm a member of the events team at Politics and Prose Bookstore. Thank you for joining us in this virtual format. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. At any point during the event, you can click on the chat and open up the chat. I will be posting a link to purchase A Woman of Intelligence. It'll take you directly to the Politics and Prose website. You can ask a question by clicking on the Q&A feature, which can be found at the bottom of your screen. We'll try to get to everyone's questions and apologize in advance if we don't have time to address yours. We are delighted to offer closed captioning for this event. Simply look for the live transcript option also at the bottom of your screen. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Karin Tanabe is the author of over 5 novels, including 100 Suns and The Gilded Years, soon to be a major motion picture starring Zendaya, who will produce alongside Reese Witherspoon's Hello Sunshine. A former Politico reporter, her writing has also been featured in the Washington Post, Miami Herald, Chicago Tribune, and Newsday. Karin will be in conversation with Paulina Bren, who is an award-winning writer and historian who teaches at Vassar College. Her recent book, The Barbizon, The Hotel That Set Women Free, is a New York Times editor's choice. It has also been optioned by HBO and actress Emilia Clarke of Game of Thrones fame. In addition, Paulina is a well-known scholar of everyday life and communism behind the Iron Curtain, starting with her groundbreaking book, The Greengrocer and His TV. Now to tonight's book. In Karin Tanabe's A Woman of Intelligence, it's 1954, and the post-war American dream has become a nightmare. A born and bred New Yorker, Katharina is the daughter of immigrants, Ivy League educated, and speaks 4 languages. As a single girl in 1940s Manhattan, she's a translator at the newly formed United Nations, devoting her days to her work and the promise of world peace, and her nights to cocktails and the promise of a good time. Now the wife of a beloved pediatric surgeon and heir to a shipping fortune, Katharina is trapped in a gilded cage, desperate to escape the constraints of domesticity. So when she is approached by the FBI and asked to join their ranks as an informant, Katharina seizes the opportunity. A man from her past has become a high-level Soviet spy, but no one has been able to infiltrate his circle. Enter Katharina, the perfect woman for the job. Please join me in welcoming our speakers to PNP Live.
Great, thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be here. Karin, I'm thrilled to be discussing your novel here, if I have it there. This is wonderful. And of course, it's extra special because we have that Vassar connection, though we haven't met before, but we have a Vassar connection. You are a Vassar grad and I teach at Vassar. And so I have to start with the obvious question, which is that your protagonist is sort of slightly based on a Vassar grad who is a Soviet spy. Wow. So yes, I wanted you to tell us more about that and what you sort of took from her experience in order to sort of build around this novel.
Yeah, so first I just want to say thank you so much for being in conversation with me. I'm thrilled. I'm a huge fan of The Barbizon. Obviously, I'm a giant fan of Vassar College since I keep going back there for inspiration. And last year, anyone who was with me knows that it was April 2020. No one knew how to use Zoom. The screen froze 3 times. I drank 2 martinis. My mom yelled at me for drinking 2 martinis and I was alone. And I was just talking at my face for an hour. So
the early COVID days. Yes.
I hope I brought the enthusiasm, but being in conversation with you is going to be so much better. So
well, we are Zoom pros now, I have to say, after almost a year and a half almost, yes.
I know. So yeah, so Vassar. So I didn't set out to write about someone from Vassar, which I did with my 2016 book, The Gilded Years, where I wrote about Anita Hemmings. I didn't even set out to write a book on motherhood. I didn't set out to write this book at all. But at the time when I was coming up with the book idea, I had two very little kids. I had a baby and I had a 2-year-old who are 18 months apart. And I wanted to write about female coders in World War II, female computer coders, based on a true story. And I'd had sort of good luck with a true story. And I thought, maybe I'll do that again. I kind of liked that world building. And I was sitting with my wonderful editor, Sarah, in a very swanky office in the Flatiron building where St. Martin's Press used to be. And I was like pitching the book, I was talking about it. And then I was like, I don't want to write this at all. And everyone was like, interesting. I was like, my editor was like, great. And I was like, I want to write about motherhood rage. I was like, I want to write about anger and rage and violence. And I'm thinking a mother who's like a hit woman for hire and murders. And like, I probably said the word murders like 10 times. And they were like, well, that's very off-brand for you. And I was like, well, that's my rage.
I'm feeling very off-brand.
I was definitely feeling off-brand.
Yeah.
And like speaking out of turn, like changing my mind like that is just, it's not me, So I think I surprised myself and everybody else. And my editor took me down to a bar, gave me a large glass of wine and was like, okay, let's talk about this idea. And we were like, well, when was it terrible for women? I mean, this is pre-pandemic. So if it was pandemic, I'd have been like, right now. But pre-pandemic, I was like, well, the 1950s, right? I mean, you think tough times for women in the sort of modern era, and you think the 50s. And when we started talking about the 50s, we started talking about the Cold War and spies and how it could be really cool to have a female spy. And I was then just chatting with my friends from Vassar, all those smart Vassar ladies. And one of them was like, have you ever heard of Elizabeth Bentley? And I hadn't. I'd never heard of her. So I went to the Vassar wiki and looked her up. And she was class of 1930 at Vassar. And she was, not a communist at Vassar, but then she went to Columbia. And at Columbia during World War II, there was like a few, I mean, you, I'm sure know far more than me, but in her memoirs, she says, there was a lot of communist activity. And she started moving more and more to the left towards communism and eventually started spying for the Soviets. And then years later, she had a change of heart after her lover died, who was a Ukrainian agent, and went to the FBI and told them everything. So she had a total about face. So I read her memoirs. I thought they were super interesting. She worked as a courier. She took stolen government documents, people who worked for the US government.
I can see how you fed all those lines into the novel. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Tell us the story.
Totally. I mean, there was so much there. I could have done a retelling, but she wasn't a mother and she didn't have that motherhood rage that I wanted very badly. So, but I took this parts about her being a courier. I took her lover, Jacob, and just slightly changed his last name. I took her life and I kind of sprinkled it amongst different characters. So there is an American woman who is a communist in the book, who is, very much embedded. And she, Rena, my main character, is secretly working for the FBI. So I took a lot, but I should.
Right. Yeah, and I want to talk more about the setting, but since you brought up sort of mother rage, I want to skip to mother rage.
I had to go there.
Cold War. Yeah, I mean, I have, I have a teenager now, but I could certainly identify, even so many years later, I could identify with the mother rage. And it was clear to me that so much of the novel is about this, as sort of exciting as the setting is, as fun as the story is. I would say sort of that kernel, really the important kernel so much is about the mother rage. Do you want to, and it felt very contemporary as a result.
Interesting.
So, and I think many readers will identify with this. So can you say something more about sort of, you know, obviously Katharina has had this, what was interesting to me particularly, that you set her as an older mother in her early 30s. That would not be considered an older mother now. In the 1950s, it was definitely considered an older mother. And I was thinking during this, I was an older mother, and I was thinking that a friend of mine who's a postpartum doula once told me they had to have special sessions. They have to have special sessions for older mothers, precisely because of this very issue that Rena has, that if you're an older mother, you've had an identity that is independent, that is work related, and suddenly you're having to sort of, at least for a while, switch over to another identity, mother identity. So do you want to say more about that, since obviously this is a very passionate part?
I mean, we may need hours. You'll have to stop me. Just stop.
Therapy hours.
Therapy hours. Yeah. So it does come from a contemporary place, my brain. Basically, I had kids as an older mother in my 30s, and I don't know, I went into it so blind, frankly, you know. I went into it being like, I can do a lot of the things. I'm a marathon runner. I write books. Like, this isn't going to be anything for me. And it was a lot. It was a lot for me, and it shocked me. And I don't think I understood what was happening to me at the time. You know, I had a friend from my new mom group text me today, who she's reading my book, and she was like, did you have postpartum? And I was like, I had rage. And she was like, oh, I had a lot of rage. And I'm like, but we didn't talk about this. You know, we were with each other when we had these newborns, and yet we never had this conversation really, because I don't think we fully understood that we were mourning this side of ourselves. You know, I think we were really mourning our identities and trying to juggle our careers, you know, in your 30s, sort of where your careers are really lifting up, and trying to handle kids and that at the same time is just so tough.
And so, if I may, it's so interesting what you say, because Rena, of course, is in the 1950s in New York, and mothers are not supposed to talk about it. It's not even that they're not talking about it because they're not quite processing it, but they literally are not allowed to talk about this, right?
Totally. I mean, you were a monster, honestly, if you said anything.
Exactly. And of course, she has sort of that counterpart, which I think we all have, the woman who seems to mother with ease, right? Do you want to say something about, the woman who sort of makes her feel more inadequate, I suppose?
Oh, there's always this, the craft mom. There's
exactly. I mean, all of this
like kids don't watch TV. Yeah. I mean, that's the modern version. But yeah, so for me, I kind of just like plowed ahead for years, like when my kids were newborns, because you're kind of in the staying alive phase. And then one day in it's all blending now, 18, I was sort of on my first like business trip. I had a fellowship to Paris, and I had been like adulting for 5 days, you know, and you'd think I would have been so happy. But after the fellowship was over, I was like staring in the mirror of my hotel room, and I just started bawling. I started crying like I'd been punched in the face. And I was crying because I just did not recognize myself. And it wasn't like a physical thing. It was just like, all of it was strange. I felt like a stranger. I felt like I was looking at a stranger, and I felt like my entire identity was gone. And I didn't like this new one. I didn't like this person. And that's something I really had Rena feel.
Exactly. And it's in that sense, it's a perfect setting for it, because it really allows us to think about those times which sort of institutionalize these feelings, right? And versus now, where we still have them, even though in theory we could express them better. I wanted to go back to the Cold War in the setting, so fascinating, but also encourage people to start asking questions in the Q&A, just typing up questions. We are going to leave time at the end for Q&A, both Karin and I were saying when we give talks or do conversations, it's the Q&A from the audience that we both really enjoy. So I encourage you, as I say to students, there's no question that's not worth asking. There's no wrong question. So please do ask anything that comes to mind. And of course, we encourage you to do that. To talk about sort of the setting. So it's perfect that it's a spy thriller on some level, because obviously Cold War, Red Scare, right? Manhattan, mid-1950s. So I have two questions. One, sort of, how did you go about researching this time and place? And was there something that you found particularly important for recreating it? And the second one, when I was reading, I was thinking sort of Rena having qualms about feeding into the Red Scare, because here is a woman who's very educated, who's worldly because she worked at the UN and because she's older. She starts to work for the CIA, sort of, as she says to herself, as a patriotic duty, that one suspects it's really because she wants to have some fun again. But she's sort of having to balance the fact that she knows that, is she feeding into the Red Scare by doing this, right? Yeah. So sort of what elements of the milieu, the time, the place did you find really productive? And how did you also talk about that balance that maybe Rena was trying to teeter across?
Yeah. First, I love your "there's no bad questions," said like a true Vassar professor.
Yeah, exactly.
I've gotten some bad questions, Paulina, but we won't tonight.
We have to say it.
Yeah, so as I said, I knew I wanted the 50s. I didn't know when in the 50s. A lot happened in the 50s. And women, right after the war, there was sort of this post-war jubilance, and I think 5% of the female workforce, 5% of the workforce who were women left between 1945 and 1950. Mm-hmm. And there was very much this, find your joy in the home with your husband and your kids. This is your patriotic duty. And that was really what interested me the most. The situation for women was what interested me the mm-hmm. most. And when I was trying to look for a year, I settled on 1954 because two reasons. It was the year that the Army McCarthy hearings were televised. Mm-hmm. So not only were you reading about this in the paper and magazines, but you were seeing this on TV, and they were like heavily televised. I mean, I think like the whole thing was on. So it was in the conversation. I have Rena talk about it at a cocktail party, and they're all like, "What do you think about this, Rena? You're all educated," as you were saying. And, she gives some witty cocktail party banter about it and kind of hedges. But so that was a big deal, because I think that was the time, and you obviously know much more than me, but that people started thinking like, this looks a little bit like a witch hunt, Exactly. Obviously red communist bad, but are we going about it in the right way?
Right.
And then 54 was also really interesting to me because it was the year of Brown versus Board of Education. So it brings on, the civil rights movement too, all these things happening kind of at the same time. And I didn't want it to be too close to the 60s, where like rebellion was really bubbling. Yeah. So 54 felt right.
No, it makes sense. And since you just brought up, this question that you sort of introduce of race.
Yeah.
Into the novel. Certainly, this was something one has to sort of try to understand about New York in the 1950s. And I'm curious sort of how you went about, trying to do research about this, about sort of, interracial relationships. To what extent, was it segregated? Was it not segregated? I mean, certainly I had this when I was writing about the Barbizon Hotel, because there were very exclusively white spaces throughout New York, of course, well through to the 1950s. But I had to figure out, and I, found a character, a person a Black woman who stayed in 1956 at the Barbizon. But it was important to sort of try to figure out how segregation had its complexities, right? So so, and I think to some extent, you're sort of delving into that as well. So what were you able to find out, and how did you sort of turn that into the relationship between Rena and the FBI agent who is a Black man?
Yeah. First of all, I loved that in your book, because when I think the Barbizon, I always think like Sylvia Plath and the glamour, but of course it is this completely white space, and I thought you did such a great job. Let me just fangirl for a second. But yeah, so, when you think of New York City, you like don't automatically go, oh, 50s, like extreme racism, you're thinking that's the deep South. Everywhere in America was racist, but New York State was one of the only states, I think there were 9, to never have anti-miscegenation laws, right? So interracial marriage was always legal in New York State. That said, it was an extremely racist time. It just was very unsaid, but it was very, very racist. And a lot of that had to do with housing and education, is what I found. There was Robert Moses, who was kind of this master builder of the 20th century New York City, and he built the segregated Stuyvesant town. And he really went out of his way, from what I read, to keep the city racist and segregated as long as possible. He put swimming pools only in white neighborhoods. In Black neighborhoods, he put them in places that were incredibly hard to access. He basically like cut off access to parks, and like now a lot of it was through neighborhoods and through real estate. And then there was also just incredibly segregated education, and that continued.
So what do you think of Rena's relationship with the FBI agent?
So
how does that fit into, you're absolutely right, everything you're saying.
Yeah. So for me, they're both really educated people, and they've both been exposed to a lot. So the FBI agent was in Korea. He fought in Korea. So he's been abroad. He's been around people of different races. He's had many careers. A lot. There were very few of the very few Black FBI agents that I read about. A lot of them had a military background. So I wanted to give him that, what would have been a plausible entree.
That would have been,
yeah. And for Rena, of course, she has foreign parents. She grew up in New York City. She was a translator at City Hall, and then at the UN, like the early days of the UN. So she's a very worldly person too, but they're both extremely aware of how rare interracial couples are, interracial marriage, and just interracial, interactions, especially between a Black man and a white woman. So there was like a Gallup poll, I think in 58, that said 1% of people in the South approved of interracial marriage and 5% of people in America approved. That is so low, and I read a few articles from, where they interviewed couples who were together in the 40s and 50s, and a lot of them were in the CRC, this communist group that I have Turner Wells infiltrate, the Civil Rights Congress. And they said, like, people used to look at us like we were zoo animals. They would just stare at us. They would say things like, they weren't, getting beaten down, but they were, people, were making them feel incredibly uncomfortable. So
and that continued easily into the 1980s.
Of course.
And absolutely.
I'd say we still face that
definitely. No, of course, racism, but I'm saying just the fact that you're walking down the street as an interracial couple, you're going to get comments easily through the 1980s.
Now 20% of marriages are interracial. Not that I look
exactly.
But
exactly.
But so they're very, very careful. And I do have a scene in the book where she is seen by a friend, and the friend is just shocked. She just absolutely can't believe. And it's not like they're sucking face on a park bench. They're just talking to each other on a bench in Central Park. So yeah, it would be very rare, but I really liked the idea of someone who had really had to climb up many hills to get where he was, to be the person that helped Rena.
Yeah. And we have 3 fun questions right now. I think I'll just go to them and I'll go back to my questions.
Yeah.
So we have a fluid discussion here. And I will start with somebody called Anonymous Attendee. So can you talk about the unique challenges you face writing historical fiction? When is it okay to bend the truth to suit the needs of the story? Can you talk about your writing process and how long you research? And I started with that one because it also sort of segues with what I was going to say. What can historical fiction do that another genre can't do?
Yeah.
Right.
So
and I think it's related very much to this question.
Totally. I'll sort of start with yours and then go into like researching historical fiction.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think what I like about historical fiction is looking for these little stories, these little stories about women almost solely. I mean, because that's what interests me, that were never told. I spoke to so many Vassar people. Have you heard of Elizabeth Bentley? No. And I'm
I
like,
only
really?
heard about her recently from a friend. Yeah.
Right. And she was a big deal back in the day. She really was. They called her the Red Spy Queen. She went to the school where you teach in the school that I went to, right? So, but she's been sort of lost in history. And so I really like giving these women, these complicated women, their due. I did that, I think, with the Gilded Years and with The Diplomat's Daughter, my fourth book, which was set in World War II. I found this tiny story, which I had never read about. And that was something I decided I wanted to write about. So I think elevating stories that have been forgotten in history is what interests me with historical fiction. It's why I like to do it. And then the audience question was about how do you do it, right?
Well, how can you talk about unique challenges you face writing historical fiction? I would say also as I sort of had a question like that. As a historian, I mean, I find historical fiction fascinating because a historian, it would be.
Do you hate it?
The idea of having to weed out all these different things.
Yeah.
In order to create a history, like that would be hard for me, I have to say.
Yeah, I think there's two giant challenges. One being people think you're a historian and you're like, I'm definitely not a historian. I would love to just write a note in the back that is like, I am not a historian. I write these books in 9 months.
I do understand that. Yeah.
And then secondly, I now think people are scared to mess up. And I think I get it, but you're probably going to mess up a little and hopefully it won't be anything big. And you just have to do your very best. And like, I think spinning things a bit to have a bit of a modern bent is okay. Like I don't stay very strictly to the language of the time, because I remember when I was writing in 1897, I read all these books set in 1897. And I was like, I can't write like this. No one's going to read it. No, like it's too old.
It feels stilted. It feels stilted. You really can't. I mean, historical fiction is not a sort of a reiteration of what happened in the past, right?
Totally. And then I keep my research extremely targeted. So that's the thing. Like I had such a panic attack writing about World War II or the Cold War, because I'm like, please don't ask me anything about the Cold War that I do not know. Like, you have like a list of like, you're like J. Edgar Hoover, like all these like people, you're like, but like, you're not an expert in the least. Right. So, and then I just talk to people. I talk to people who lived then. For this book, I talked to a bunch of women who worked in publishing or in large offices in the 1950s. And I was just like, tell me about your life, and one woman just was like, Karin, two things, gin and air conditioning. I was like, all right, gin and air conditioning. So I literally like changed all my drinks to gin.
So of course it was gin. Oh my goodness, it wasn't vodka. Yes.
No vodka. No, I mean, not just the copious amounts of champagne you think of like the
No, gin. Exactly.
So I mean, all my ladies.
Air conditioning. It showed up in offices around like 1953, right? So air conditioning was coming literally
big deal
as your story is set. Yeah.
Yeah, and she was like, we would just go to places that had a sign in the window that said air conditioning, movie theaters, like. Yeah. But then, I mean, I also made tons of mistakes, and luckily you have copy editors and fact people to help you. I mean, I wrote pantyhose instead of stockings, and it was caught in fact check. I mean, they're not going to check everything for you.
Yeah.
But
no, don't trust me. I bless those copy editors and fact checkers at my end too.
Yeah. Or like this building didn't exist, or all the editors live in New York City. So they were like, that's not the fastest subway route. Actually, you should go here and here and there.
Yes. No, I mean, this is, sometimes it takes a village to some extent. Well, you answered, when is it okay to bend the truth?
Always, no, it's not. You'll be
not exactly. Very quickly, the end of that question, because I want to move on to others, is can you talk about your writing process and how long you research? I think that's a really great question, because I think, again, I know from my experience doing all this research in order to start writing the book, and you actually there has to come a point where you have to stop researching and you have to start writing. I'm not sure if you have that problem, but for writers who are writing narrative history, it's you physically have to say, okay, enough is enough.
No, I mean, I bow down to you. I can't imagine having to just tell the truth all the time. Must be terrible. But also being a professor, like, people maybe let me make a mistake, but they probably won't let you make a mistake. But I think what I do is I will research for like a month, maybe less, maybe like 3 weeks, and just build up as much as I can, as targeted as I can. Like, I will not let myself go down the Wikipedia rabbit hole.
I understand now.
And so I'll try to keep it super targeted. Like, I was reading only, magazines and like New York Times, Times Machine set in 1954, like exactly the months that I was writing about. So like, honestly, ask me about 1953.
You go for emotion.
Yeah. So you just go really deep into exactly what you have to know. And a lot of the time I'll just be like, fill in more later, because honestly, I think I'm stronger at dialogue than I am not in dialogue description. And I'm more comfortable there. And that's where I like to start. So I kind of write my books as plays a little at first. It's just like chatty, especially with this one, 1950s, these fast talking dames. I just loved it. I just wanted to write like snappy dialogue all day long.
And it's a very visual decade, even as it's not good for women. It's a very visual decade.
It's beautiful, but ugly. Yeah. So I keep it very targeted. And then I would read, like, I'm like, what are these women seeing? I read the help wanted section, which made me want to shoot myself. Yeah. I mean, everything says girls, attractive, under 33. And you're like, wow. And then you look at ads, and then, I did, Elizabeth Bentley's FBI file is public. So I did spend a lot of time there. And then I looked at the history of Black agents in the FBI for a long time, but it was all like very tight.
No, that answers the question beautifully. If somebody has their name, is it okay if I say their name?
Yes, I probably know them.
Okay. Megan Carroll. Congratulations on there we go.
She works at the United Nations. Megan, tell me everything I did wrong.
Oh, that's good to have somebody like that. Congratulations on the book, Karin. Which book of yours are you most proud of, and why?
Oh, I mean, this one, hands down. I'm going to say multiple reasons. One, as I have, emoted all over this, it was postpartum. Anger and identity loss was something I really faced. And it's, in a way, my most personal book. And then also, while I was writing it, the pandemic hit, right? So I had all this ghostwriting work to do. I had a book due, and then my 2 toddlers came home, and I tried to juggle it. I mean, I honestly wrote most of this.
Did you say you had ghostwriting to do?
Yeah, I like ghost read a lot of stuff for the money, Paulina, for the cash.
I hear you.
So everyone buy my book so I can stop ghostwriting. But I did stop ghostwriting during the pandemic because I couldn't keep it up. I mean, something had to fall, and it was not going to be a woman of intelligence. So working on a book about like the motherhood juggle and anger, and then going into a pandemic where you're then forced to write from like 4 to 7 a.m. and then 10 p.m. to midnight because your husband is on Zoom all day and you have to watch the kids, was horrible. I mean, it was horrible.
I was going to say, it sounds like a nightmare. It wasn't a breeze having a teenager either, but I really was feeling sorry for everybody with small children.
Yeah, and of course the world had much bigger problems than me in my book, and I knew that, but it was the first time in my life I thought I might not finish.
Yeah.
I like had my email ready, like, dear Sarah, I know you said novel, but what about novella?
Exactly. A little short story here for you. Wonderful. Very quick question from Lorraine Rose. Who do you see playing Rena in the movie?
Ooh, oh gosh, it's such a tough role. I keep writing these characters, all these languages, right? So Rena speaks French, German, Italian, English, Russian. I mean, there's a lot of languages going on. So it has to be sort of a polyglot or someone who's comfortable, but also kind of ragey. I don't know. You all are gonna have to suggest people.
Rose Byrne. I'm thinking Rose Byrne.
Oh, she'd be good. She'd be really good.
Just the look.
I mean, I've if I could like get Katharina Hepburn resurrected, I would.
Oh yes, well, that goes without saying, I think. Okay, we have here another Kathy Feldman. Karen, because you look back in time and back at real people in time, I'm wondering if you've ever thought about reaching way back and writing about a woman from the Renaissance or ancient Egypt or those wacky Victorians. Yeah. Also, I miss you.
Oh, I miss you too. Kathy was my neighbor for so long, and she's an amazing writer. No. I honestly, that intimidates me. I feel myself creeping up, not going back. I do. I think the book I did before this one was so research heavy. It took place in 1930s Indochina, and I did everything in French. And I think my brain like exploded a little. And now I'm like, how do I convince my editor that the 90s is historical? I don't. It
is historical.
It's retro. I think I can't do it. It intimidates me too much. I love to read books set there, and I bow down to the people that write them, but I'm scared.
No, and I completely understand. I think there's something I also very much embedded in the 20th century, because you can still get a sense, a feel for the time.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, certainly trying to write about the Renaissance, I mean, maybe if I was a Renaissance scholar, maybe that would be easier. I really don't know, but I understand your hesitation. Let me see. What I really liked also, I have to say, is the relationship that Rena had with Ava. To see a relationship between two women like that was really nice. So I wanted you to say something about that, but I also would really like to encourage people. Oh, wonderful. Somebody came up with a question, but I wanted to encourage people to write in more questions. As I say, there's no wrong question. So yes, please tell us something a little bit about sort of that relationship between Ava and Rena without giving away too much. So.
Yeah. Oh, Ava's one of my favorite characters, and she wears this colored dress, and I really need the TV or film adaptation to work that color in. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Ava and Rena took Elizabeth Bentley's job, and I split it between them, sort of. Yeah. So Ava is a communist, and Rena's pretending to be a communist. And Rena has kids and a husband, and Ava does not. And they're both women who want much more than life is giving them. And for the 50s, life is giving them a lot, right? They have money, they have beauty, they have brains. They should just be content being mothers and housewives. This should be enough for them. Ava grew up in like super waspy Connecticut. She talks about how she can just grill salmon with the best of them and looks phenomenal in tennis whites, but she's like, this cannot be my life. And she wants adventure wherever she can find it. And Rena, it takes her a while to figure this out, but then also decides this. And like you were saying, and I didn't answer your question about how she can, sort of spy on the Reds when she doesn't really believe this. I think for her, she knows these people are going to be like sussed out eventually. The CRC was at the very end of being disbanded. So I think she's like, they're all going to be figured out anyway, and I really need something to do. So here we go. But there's a scene, which is one of my very favorite scenes, where Ava and Rena are at the movie theater and they're just being kind of crazy. Ava wants to rob someone who looks rich, and Rena's like, are you insane? And they're just like having chatter. And Ava asks Rena, like, is it really the best feeling in the world to have kids? Is it like a love you've never known? And Rena says, you know, when you go to a movie that everybody says is the best movie, like an Orson Welles movie, and they're like, you have to see this, you're incomplete until you see this. And then you see it and it's great, but because everybody told you it was so great, it's just not the greatest movie you've ever seen. And she's like, well, that's motherhood. I mean, a lot of it's amazing, but so many other things are amazing. It's not the be all and end all, the raison d'etre of living. And she says, Ava says, sometimes, just sometimes I wish I knew that feeling. And Rena says, sometimes I wish I didn't know that feeling. And I think that's a really honest conversation. And I think it's one we don't hear.
Yeah, that's why I loved the relationship. And I also really liked that, because I found the same thing in the Barbizon, that we sort of have these, I don't want to say cliched, because they're also, well, cliches tend to be true. So in that sense, yes, it's true, but we have these cliched, true ideas of the 1950s and the role of women. But the more you dig, be it fictionally, right, or historically, is that the simple fact is women had the same desires, the same ambition, and they were having very similar conversations, and they were finding ways of sort of circumventing the circumstances, not always successfully, but they were trying. And that sort of is also what the two of them are trying to do. And it adds that complexity to what can often be a sort of a one-trick pony story of the 1950s and women, I think. So really enjoyed that. We have some other questions.
Yeah.
I'll start with this one because it's fun. It's true. Victoria Kelly, can you tell us how the cover came about? I love it.
Oh, thank you, Victoria Kelly. Victoria is a wonderful author herself, by her book, Mrs. Houdini. The cover. Okay. So the art department makes the cover, really, and then they send you an email being like, hope you love the cover. And then you open it and you really hope you love the cover. And I did love the cover. I loved everything about the cover except the bag. So I love fashion and I'm annoying about it, I think. Well, the art department at St. Martin's would definitely say I
would agree with you.
But I had them change the bag, I think 3 times, maybe 4, because it just—
Oh, don't worry. I was such a pain about my cover too. I completely relate.
I was like a polite pain, but I was a pain. And finally they were like, well, you do it. So then I found this bag and they put it in and it looked really good. And
oh, very good.
Yeah. And it was the guy. So we're gonna, excuse him if he wasn't a 1950s handbag expert. But I loved all the yellow.
Clearly he was fed up with you though.
That's fine. And I love the green, and I think and the spine. Yeah. And it's a mood. I love it. It's like a confident mood. You know the era you're in. I hope it sells on cover alone.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny you said green, because when I was somewhere signing books and the person who works in the bookstore said, it's so interesting that your book is green. Most book covers have no green in them.
Really?
Yes, I hadn't realized. They look at books all the time. So I think we might be starting a trend to get green back onto the, or greenish hues back onto covers, just saying. Let me see. James Dugan says, there's that famous statement that writers enjoy having written as opposed to the writing itself. But are there any aspects of the writing process itself, which could include everything from brainstorming to final edits, that you particularly enjoy?
Yeah. I mean, it is great when the book is done. And sometimes you look at it and you're like, how did it happen? Like, how is this now in my hand? Because you forget all the bad stuff, right? But first of all, Jim Dugan bought 8 copies of my book from Politics and Prose, so we all bow down.
Thank you.
Only beaten by my dad. So I love I love dialogue. I said that before. I think for me, in the actual first draft process, which is an ugly process, when I write something that makes me laugh, it's like I've taken drugs. I literally feel like I'm going to explode with joy. I love it. I'm like, that's a zinger. This is good. It's not going to get out in edits. Like, this is going to stay. And then when my editor, she has like a check system. If something's good, it's like 1 check. If something's amazing, it's like 3 checks. And
it's
if
like stickers.
yeah, it's like it has.
It's a sticker system.
When it's like 3 checks and a ha ha ha, I'm like, I've won.
Yeah.
I have won life.
There we go.
So yeah, I definitely get a high from writing good dialogue, which I think will, zing with people. And then I really enjoy the second draft. I think when you get your book back from an editor, there's still so much work. I mean, so many rewrites, but at least you're like working with someone else.
Love editing. I love the editing moment.
Yeah, that's great. You're rewriting a ton, but you're not kind of just going blind.
Exactly.
So that's a beautiful place to be in.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm writing a first draft right now. And honestly, after writing this book in the year I had, it's fun. I'm almost enjoying it.
Well, this takes us wonderfully to the next question. I don't know how we're doing this. One Acosta says, congratulations on your new book. I'm curious to know how far in advance do you think of your new project? See, do you give yourself time between your books? Clearly not. Or are you constantly thinking of your next great novel? Lovely question.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Juan. Juan is a Vassar grad. He was in my class at Vassar and a wonderful human being. And thank you so much for being on. So I don't have time between books, but I don't think I'd have it any other way. I mean, maybe I'd have like a month more to just, lie on a beach and not use my brain. But I kind of turn in a book as soon as a book is coming out. So I have my book I'm writing now is due at the end of August. So it's really, you're a year ahead, I think, from when you turn in your draft.
Wow.
And I kind of just came up with an idea that I think I want to explore for my next book. So I have a list. I mean, I have a list of like, maybe these will work ideas that I just keep running all the time. And I mean, ideas are not my problem. It's execution that's harder.
Yeah. Well, that's good. At least you've got the ideas going. But clearly your execution is doing rather well, may I say. So I wouldn't poo-poo that.
No, but I love coming up with book ideas. I do. And I think, I don't know if you feel this way, but I always want to do something pretty different. I'm not like, let me write a series and like stay with all these characters.
Yeah, absolutely.
If one hits big, I will Harry Potter my way through this.
Yeah. Yes. No, but I feel the same way. I set out to write something. I've written it. I'm done. I'm not going to write about that period again. I'm not going to write about that particular, place or idea or whatever again. Yeah, no, I have the same. We have to keep ourselves interested to keep readers interested.
Absolutely.
Are there Marsha Waldstreicher? Are there any characters or side stories in any of your books that weren't part of your original outline for the book?
No.
Or the inverse? Are there any characters or side stories you wish you could have included? Also a really good question.
Oh,
you're all doing much better than me with your questions, by the way.
No, your questions are great.
No,
I think like every character is new. I honestly, Ava didn't exist in my early writes. And I was just going to sort of take Elizabeth Bentley and put it all in Rena. But then, I don't know, I had this interaction with this like beautiful, sassy blonde who was a communist. And I was like, I like this character. I think I'm going to keep her. And that happens a lot, is like you have a C-list, what happens to me a lot, a C-list character that you promote, the A-list, because they'll start talking. I'm like, I know I'm writing this, but sort of sometimes it feels like you're not. Yeah, and you're like, this person's great. I'm going to keep them around, And then sometimes I give people bigger roles than I thought they would have. People, who I thought would show up for 10 pages are there for 100. And then I have to change everybody's name. I have used the name Leo like 7 times. I don't know why, but the FBI agent was Leo Coldwell. And then I was like, Karin, you had a character named Leo in your 4th book. Like you, what's wrong with you? So I just changed it to Lee. I just did like a find and replace for the E and named him Lee Coldwell. But yeah, I think you fall in love sometimes with your like supporting characters. I think that they can sort of shine. You know, it's like in movies where this one side character steals the show. It's
absolutely. Where did that go? Hold on. Oh, here we go. Deborah Bruno. Hi, Karin. As I try to write history, I'm kind of insanely jealous of your ability to take an aspect of a story and just run with it. Would you ever do straight history? Oh, Deborah's a historian too, I see.
She is. She's writing nonfiction right now.
Would you ever do straight history? And follow-up question, why are there no martinis at this event?
My mom yelled at me, Deborah Bruno. I got an earful, let's say, about last year. I think I had 2 actually. But it was the start of a global pandemic and I was writing about 1930s Indochine. So, but I mean, I should have had a gin martini for this one. I really would have been appropriate, and air conditioning. But so yeah, history. No, absolutely not. No, I will not. I thought about writing nonfiction for a hot second and I just love lying. It's so much more fun. I'm not a historian. I mean, I bow down to you all, to you, Paulina, because I remember when I was a journalist, I was just scared of getting something wrong.
Yeah.
I was scared kind of all the time. There was like a low level fear of messing up.
Oh yeah, I know that fear very well.
I'm sure you have it. And especially in this day and age, like before, I feel like you could kind of mess up and like, okay, maybe you'd get like one handwritten letter about it. You mess up now, I mean, you're going to be in trouble. So I don't have the strength of character for this, nor do I like to dive that deep into research. Like I really like writing dialogue. Really, at the end of the day, that's my passion. So I guess I could have my historical.
Have you thought about screenwriting if you love dialogue so much?
I mean, that's where the money is. I have. I really want to write a play. I know my editor's gonna faint and be like, "Oh, please don't write a play." But
speaking of money,
yeah, one day, my senior year at Vassar, I had a professor, or one of my years, who said to me, and it stayed with me. She said, I wrote a play for a class and she took me aside and she said, you know, you really could be a playwright. And I took it and I put it in my heart and it's still there. So
those things, they mean something, they matter.
I can like tell you what she was wearing. It resonated so much.
Absolutely. Let me see. I'll ask a question since it's related to what you just said. Would you say, this is a Vassar question, I suppose. Was that when you finished at Vassar, did you have a sense of what you wanted to do? Was there something at Vassar that led you to this wonderful profession that you're lucky enough to be a part of?
Yeah, I think the best thing, I mean, I got so many things out of Vassar. Obviously, I'm like a Vassar fangirl. I just keep going back there for inspiration. But what I loved about Vassar was, one, it's tiny. You had this really close relationship with your professor. So I was able, to have these conversations with my professors about my career and my future. And it was a place, and I'm sure still is, a place where creativity is just applauded. No one's ever like, well, minor in accounting, not that we have accounting, but there's no well, you should have a backup plan. And for, I think, a lot of creative kids, your parents always tell you, even me, you should have a backup plan. My dad used to say to me, work in luxury goods. There's a lot more money. Work for LVMH. I think you can write press releases. I think musicians and writers and actors and artists are so used to having people say, do this for a while, and when it doesn't work out, you can go to your backup plan.
Oh, yeah.
And at Vassar, it was like, no, you do not need a backup plan. This is what you're good at. We're going to encourage you. We're going to say things like this. Yeah. And I loved it. And all of my friends are wacky creatives. So
that's terrific. Is there, oh, this is Amy Pons. I'm sorry if I'm like mangling your names. I'm really bad at pronouncing names. This is, I mean, at the start of every semester as I go through the new names, oh, the gasps.
I mean, Amy Barnes is 2 syllables also.
Okay, no, but I could still mess it up, trust me. So is there a character in all of your books that you relate to most of all?
Oh, well, I mean, obviously, Katrina's
Rena.
Yeah, I'll say her. I mean, definitely. I've never put so much of myself into a character ever, I think. A lot of the characters I write, my friends always say, I can hear you. I can hear your voice in this person. I can, and you try not to do that as a writer, but I think for me, it's sort of impossible, I guess. But I think a lot of the times I'm usually the sassy friend though. Like I'm not the main character. I'm more like the friend, the devil on your shoulder, if you will. But with Katrina, yeah, I went for it. And honestly, like it's sometimes hard to talk about how personal it is. I never set out to do this. I remember early on having kids, I wrote an article for the Washington Post on parenting section. And people were like, this is great. You can be a mommy blogger. Like also that term killed me. And they're like, you can write about parenthood. And I said, and I'd had a kid for a month. I said, I don't like it enough. I don't want to do it. So I never thought I would write a book about motherhood ever. And I never thought I would write a book about like things we don't talk about enough or things that need to be addressed.
This is the best way of writing a book about motherhood.
I mean, I guess.
It's not really a book about motherhood, but it is a book about motherhood, but it's about so much more. So
I hope it is about so much more.
It really is.
But sometimes I wish I just made her an assassin, Paulina, then
I hear you. The violence is coming back.
Then she could just be an assassin. So maybe in the sequel, she'll be an assassin.
There we go. We have one last question, which is just, I think, perfect timing. So Lucy Cobble, do you enjoy reading, particularly historical fiction, in your free time, which might be limited with 2 toddlers, and I'll add ghostwriting and other such things?
Yeah, I love historical fiction. I think whenever I'm writing about a certain period, that's what I read, right? So I read books. For this one, I've read books set in the 50s that were written in the 50s, like Breakfast at Tiffany's or The Best of Everything. But I'll also read books set in the 50s that were written now. So you kind of get 2 different voices, which I think is really important when you're writing historical fiction in a contemporary setting. But historical fiction, Immortals is one of my favorite writers. I can't read him too much because it intimidates me. Ishiguro is one of my favorite writers. So he kind of writes wherever he wants to write, which I love about him. I read tons of historical fiction, but I read a lot of contemporary stuff too. And then I read things that were written a zillion years ago. I mean, I think it's important to read all over the place, but you do kind of have to read your competition too.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. We're going to do a last question here because your editor just came in with a question.
Oh no, ignore everything.
Speaking of wonderful supporting characters, I adored Amelia Edgeworth from the first draft. Oh, Sarah, now you're introducing things we know nothing about. And I always felt like Amelia and Rena have more in common than either of them realize. Was that in your mind from the beginning, or did it emerge over the course of writing the novel?
Yeah. Oh, Sarah Canton is my beloved editor, who's been my editor since the beginning. So Amelia Edgeworth is Rena's husband's mom, and she's like a total society lady and kind of hates Rena in the beginning because Rena's too poor for her son and probably too independent. I knew that she was going to be a strong character, but of a very different generation, one that gave up everything and did it more without kicking and screaming, because you couldn't really kick and scream, back then. So, but when she and Rena start talking, even though they sort of start by arguing, it does come out that they do have a lot in common. And one of their conversations is like, Rena's like, well, why didn't you tell me it was so hard? Why didn't you tell me this was so difficult? And she was like, don't be insane. I can't tell you it's difficult. You won't procreate, you know?
Yeah, I loved that. Yeah, and I should say, Sarah, thank you because I'd forgotten to mention Amelia, and I was thinking Mrs. Edgeworth. Loved that character.
Oh, thank you. She's one of my favorite characters too, and she probably has the best lines.
Exactly. Wonderful.
So yeah, I mean, I love writing an older woman with a cocktail who no longer cares what she says and just puts it out there.
Everyone's dream right there.
Anyway, I wish we had more time. Go ahead, Paulina.
No, I just want to say, it seems we're coming to an end. So I just wanted to really thank you, Karin. This was fun. And thank everybody who was here and asking questions, and they were terrific as well. And you just became a part of the whole conversation. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It was wonderful. It beat the 2 martinis talking at the screen while it froze.
Oh, we'll add that next time. Come on.
Well, thank you both for being here. I know I speak for everybody when I say I wish we had more time. It's been such a wonderful, lovely chat. As a gentle reminder, I've put the link to purchase the book in the chat. It'll take you directly to the Politics and Prose website, where you can also check out our events page, and we hope to see you at another event soon. In the meantime, thank you again. Stay well, everyone, and stay well read.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.